first. The first project is Kevin Wardell with Metro United Way. That's the first report out we're going to do. And let me pull up that slide deck, and then I need to share it. And so if you want to find Kevin and spotlight him. Okay, can you all see?
He is on a call.
Yeah, Kevin is just on the phone, I believe. Or Kevin, are you on here twice or just?
I'm on there twice, but so I can leave later and be on the phone.
So find the one where we can see his beautiful face. If there is one where we can see. Yep, there he is. I see him. He's sitting in a recliner in a blue shirt, Melissa, if you're browsing through the thumbnails. So if you want to spotlight Kevin, and then I'll go full screen with the slides. So hopefully you guys are seeing full screen slides, and I will throw the floor to Mr. Wardell.
Okay, you've got me then, right? You can hear me well?
You're good.
Okay. So this is the Metro United Way team that we're reporting today. It's a long project, but we're all still actively engaged with this process. You can see the team members there: Michael, Harold, JR, Jim Gravitt has been a very active facilitator, and myself. Next slide. The purpose of this team was, and you can see it quoted there in italics, to help the United Way create its multi-year strategic fundraising plan to fuel more impact in a philanthropic landscape that looks nothing like it did when we were founded in 1917. Some of the things that we talked about quite a bit was their need to move planning beyond the fall workplace campaign, the change in employers, we've many more smaller employers. The big, massive employers have downsized significantly. So the workplace campaign is not the be-all and everything of United Way any longer, and yet it does take all their attention in the fall. They need to moderate that and address other needs. That's really the second point as well. They have a much greater desire at United Way to have an increased impact on Louisville's greatest needs, as cited in various studies, including the project. And so they've undergone a process, and as many of you know, next one down, that talks about shifting their funding priorities and algorithms. Some agencies are going to get less, some are going to get more, but they're really trying to focus their attention on those areas of greatest need: education, poverty, hunger, and the like. They also have developed a new structure and have a brand new development director who is in charge of development for the organization, David Lopez. They brought him in from Albuquerque. I have to say, we have all been incredibly impressed by David. A lot of talent there, and that's made this project, even though it's gone on forever, a joy. And the expected time frame was to start in fall last year and to complete by mid-year through 2 cycles. We are more or less completed our project, but as you'll see in the future, all of us are continuing on to be active members of their development planning process. Next slide. So how did we help? In many ways, the 5 of us became very active attendees and participants in the original 3 planning subgroups that David organized for the development process. In some early meetings, we dominated those meetings, in fact, as members, as participants, not just as consultants. I think that changed over time and as more people became engaged from the United Way board and from others. We acted heavily as a sounding board for David, the director. We met with him repeatedly, one-on-one, and we asked tough questions, providing an outside perspective, primarily of the planning process. We sought and received perspective from past United Way board members and volunteers. We interviewed some of them either in person or by phone to understand what the past planning initiatives had resulted in. We proposed several planning mid-course corrections, and this again gets at process. The two biggest ones were to coordinate much more closely with the impact planning. What I should have mentioned is while the development piece that we're working on had a strategic plan under development, the community impact side was also planning and changing those algorithms and changing where the priorities ought to be, and they were disconnected. So we proposed and worked with them to coordinate them much more closely. Have had some joint meetings and the like, and that was definitely spun out of our group. The other one was to consolidate the three original planning subgroups into one. Part of that was a lack of numbers. I think Harold came up with the idea that we were going to call it a committee composed of the willing, those people who really wanted to be engaged in this process, and to consolidate those three groups into one, and to consider all of the recommendations that had been generated by the three subgroups along the way. So that was a change we impacted. I should have mentioned earlier that one of the other mission issues that came up in the impact process that affects fundraising is that the organization sees itself changing somewhat from a fundraising intermediary, just kind of raising money and passing through to other agencies, but becoming a real focused convener around these major projects, getting various agencies to work together and to seek grants jointly through the United Way. And so that's another big part of what they're doing. From our process perspective, and Harold worked hard on this too, is to identify successful peer United Way organizations, to identify what they had been and where their successes had been. He developed what he called the I-65 corridor, so we looked at Birmingham and Nashville and Indianapolis and other United Way organizations, talked to many of them, reviewed all of their 990s and the like. Birmingham in particular has an incredible amount of money because of some federal grants that they've sought that run through the United Way. They don't run through United Way here, although many of those grant dollars do come into Louisville through the U of L or through other places. And then we proposed key performance indicators for each of their 6 major strategies. I have to tell you that even this morning at 9 o'clock, most of us were on a Zoom call before this one, reviewing those indicators for a couple of those major strategies. And lastly, we provided some one-on-one consultation with their marketing people, and Michael Bateman primarily did that. Next. And then lastly, just our list of our outcomes. We're not developing a formal report or deliverable beyond the planning outcomes that I've mentioned. Our participation and guidance is reflected in their strategic plan, and that's really what the second bullet talks about. We wanted to make sure that we were not just consultants coming in and delivering a product. This was way too important, and they had to have a very strong sense of ownership. As I mentioned, the plan is still under development. It was delayed both by the process of coordinating the impact and development planning, which we had recommended. That took a couple steps backwards at that point, and then by COVID-19, and of course everything is virtual now, and the target date is the end of the year. As I mentioned, we became very active and respected committee members. Everyone on the committee was fully engaged in the team, and we have in fact agreed to continue as individuals on the planning teams through the ending of their planning process outside the Encore process. And so that's really what we were all doing this morning. So that's our report. This is a terribly important organization to this community, and I think it's why we've felt that we needed to, this was an important project. It's important for Encore, and it was important for us to really continue to be engaged and go through 2 cycles plus. And with that, I just invite some other comments from team members. JR, Harold, Michael, Jim. I think Jim is not available today.
I would just add, when we were asked, obviously, in our final report to put a price on it, we suggested the value of the time that we spent was about $15,000. When United Way responded to that same question as to what they saw the value of the team, they set the value at $150,000, which we were excited about because we felt like we had given them everything we had and continue to give it. And we saw that they, in fact, really valued that and set up an amazing value to it.
You know, one thing, thinking about that prompts me, one of the things we did here, I think we got Teresa more engaged in the planning process, the CEO. We really pressed David to make sure she was fully engaged in the development side. I think she was more involved than maybe in the impact side. But as time went on, we saw more and more of Teresa, and so we got a good dose of her time in this process, and I think supported David enormously in that, making sure that he had sponsorship from the top.
Any other comments from the Make-A-Wish
Any other comments?
Metro United Way team?
Well, another one of the great challenges is going to be how to communicate all of these changes that are going to be coming about, which is some of the things that we talked over with the marketing team. And that's both an internal and an external sales group. I think Teresa mentioned that they had kind of a bell curve about the whole change within the organization. You know, at one end, they had had people who were ready to go and they're ready to change. Another end that was very resistant to changes just because of inertia. And then there was this big group in the middle that really kind of needed to be convinced. And that's where the internal marketing is going to have to take place. And then obviously with external, with those groups that are going to be getting more money or less money, they have to be shepherded along so that what is seen to the giving public is this vision, and not merely that United Way is changing and things are going to be exactly the same. So there's still a lot of issues that need to be addressed as far as the marketing part of it is concerned.
Related to that too, again, this is Kevin, and I probably understated the cultural change that this kind of strategic change is going to produce. I mean, the culture has been focused around the fall campaign, and we heard this over and over again. And there are people that, value themselves from their role in the fall campaign. That was a badge of honor, the involvement in that. And to shift that away gets at some major change initiatives with people and people accepting changing roles and the like. That goes even beyond marketing, and it's why Teresa, as the CEO, that's her job, is to make sure that those kinds of cultural changes occur, and I think she fully recognizes that.
Okay, I'm going to jump in. This has been a great report out, but we are out of time on this one. Thank you, team. And by the way, you guys did that project for 2 cycles, and it sounds like you're staying on for the rest of. So you're not allowed to quit Encore and just do that. Just so you know, you still have to come back here and do more Encore projects. You can't just move there. And interesting note, JR, to your point of the valuation that David Lopez put on this was at the time we got that evaluation the highest value ever placed on an Encore project of $150,000. But one of the evaluations we got for this cycle valued their team at $1 million. So unfortunately, your record-breaking evaluation did not last very long. Okay, so next up on the report out is Bill Hensler sharing on communities and schools of Clark County. So Melissa, if you want to spotlight Bill while I share screen on that slide deck.
We were not the team that was worth $1 million, but
No, I'm sorry.
we were something. Yeah.
You were still in
That's a hard act to follow.
That is.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I will share with you today the work that our Encore team did with communities and schools of Clark County. Team members were Cindy, Stephanie, Marty, myself, Mimi Zanil, and I do want to recognize Diane for being our team lead and keeping us on the straight and narrow with meetings and communications and output. So thank you to Diane. I don't think she's here, but I do want to acknowledge that. And before we go to the next slide, let me just do a quick elevator speech on communities in schools of Clark County. Other than being a mouthful to say, they are a local affiliate, one of 187 around the country. The Clark County branch was established in 2002. Their mission is to provide a community of support for students at risk. They want to empower students to stay in school and build a foundation for them to achieve in life. Right now, they serve 17 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 1 high school in and a leaf blower in Clark County. Services they provide are aftercare, after-school care, on-site, generates about half of their revenue. They do tutoring, vision screening, counseling, reading, which is very volunteer-driven. They provide food, clothing, supplies to students in need. And they do this through part-time employees located in the specific schools called resource coordinators. By all accounts, the organization is very healthy. They were named the 2018 Nonprofit of the Year by One Southern Indiana. But about a year ago, they appointed a new executive director. That executive director then turned to Leadership Louisville and asked for help in the following areas. So next slide. They wanted to know how they could increase their awareness, not only for their organization, but the services they provide students. And they wanted to know how they could be more focused and effective with their messaging and marketing. Next slide. We went about this. We looked inside the organization and outside the organization. Inside, we spoke to the executive director, many of the staff, and very valuably, we spoke to past and present board members. Outside of the organization, One Southern Indiana, the Chamber of Commerce, Community Foundation of Southern Indiana, the premier nonprofit of that area. And of course, school principals and staff to get their idea of what they thought of how they could improve their awareness and improve their messaging. We had available to us, their bylaws, their annual report, very well-run organization. And of course, in the age of quarantine, we finished the project using Zoom with the executive director. What we found were 3 basic things. So we can go to the next slide there. They did, in fact, have problems with their visibility. We found that many thought that the services that they were providing were actually through the school system. They didn't see a difference between Clark County and communities and schools. There were even some teachers that weren't familiar with the services they provided. We found also one of our main things with their messaging was that the communities and school name just did not describe what they did. It seemed irrelevant. It got lost on people. We also thought, yeah, they could improve their marketing and be more effective in how they were using their internal staff based in Clark County there for their messaging. And maybe one of the most important parts was that their board, while they wanted to have a higher profile, really wasn't structured to get them towards higher visibility. So our recommendations, kick to the next one. First one was re-energize the board, particularly with recruitment and governance. One of the things with their board, I don't think they had any term limits. There were 1 or 2 that had been on the board since that Clark County was founded in 2002. And they're good people, but maybe not fresh blood. We wanted them to look for maybe gaps that they had in skills and interests and representation in the community on the board, and create charters for the finance committee and executive committee and fund development committees. and had to make sure that they were reviewing and revising their bylaws as necessary. Didn't seem like a lot of that was going on. The next thing we recommended was to rename the organization, something that would connote the types of services that they provide to people, accompanied by even a new logo. Next. With their communications, we thought they should be using their office-based staff, but maybe use the resource coordinators who are located in the schools to provide the outlet for the material that the office staff makes, so that it was more personal and more relevant to the audience, the people in the schools, the teachers who could recommend services. Expand the external communications of the executive director. Make sure she's periodically contacting businesses and interest groups in Clark County to raise awareness. They're doing a good job using social media, I think, but we did recommend that they try to look for more innovative ways to get their distribution out. Maybe put materials in pediatricians' offices in Clark County, some way to reach, again, those people that could benefit from the services they provide. Create an outreach strategy to corporate and individual volunteers, perhaps use the reading program that has been successful for them to not only engage people, but then maybe cultivate contributors and future board members through that outreach. And finally, it all feels good, it all looks good, but would there be some way for them to quantify with some empirical data about the results of the program, whether it's test performance, whether it's attendance, whether it's lack of dropping out. Maybe they could follow some students who have been in the program and see whether they were able to, what they were able to do after high school, whether they were in higher education or whether they were able to get jobs out of school. But again, some way to quantify all this good work that they seem to be doing. I have a follow-up with the executive director. I did ask her, I said, so how's it going? What, we're able to do any of these things? And she said there are two that they're doing. They are taking a survey, kind of an inventory of their current board, and with the aim of trying to identify what sort of people they need to try to recruit for their board in the future. The second one, and Marty, I don't know if you're on the call still, but you'll be glad to know that the board is very seriously considering a name change, even though they think that it might affect the way that it will affect their relationship with the national organization. But I think they saw the value in that if they want more awareness, if they want to be selling themselves more, that a name that was more relevant and had more traction with people would probably be more beneficial. That is it. Any, Cindy, I think you were on the line there, or any other?
Bill, I'm here, and thank you. I thought that covered everything. So I appreciate it. Good job.
Thanks. Tabitha, by the way, Tabitha, she is the executive director, I'm saying to Cindy. She continues to express her appreciation for it. I was really surprised that they were doing the name change, but I think she felt strongly enough about that if they want to really start moving forward, they need something that probably is more relevant to their audience.
Good job, Bill.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Bill. Appreciate it. Appreciate the team. And the next one up is Elder Serve, and Pam Greenwell is going to be doing that one. So Melissa, if you want to find and spotlight Pam Greenwell, and I will put up Pam's slides. All right, is that looking at what we're supposed to look at? Okay, Pam,
Yes.
take it away.
We're good. Okay, this is our team. Had a great team. I don't think there was a meeting that anybody missed. Everybody had specific gifts that they brought to Elder Serve and really were wonderful. So if you will go to slide number 2. Elder Serve really was having some issues figuring out how to make their health care, their daycare profitable. The adult daycare was intended to make enough money to support their their other program where neighborhood people would come and do activities, because the adult day had various payment sources, and so they needed it to be profitable, frankly, so that it could cover other things. Next slide. We took a facility tour, which was fascinating because the space that they had intended for the adult day was literally under construction. Although I say under construction, it was demoed, but no construction had begun. That was part of the issue. We had several meetings with the executive director, several board members and key staff members. We reviewed a lot of their information, budgets and financials. We had lots of group meetings on our own. In fact, we made such progress that what we did is we had a phase where we sat down with them, made some recommendations, several recommendations, told them we had enough time left on the project that if they wanted us to go back in and delve in depths with a couple of those recommendations, we would be happy to do that. They did, came up with that, and so we in phase 2 came up with a second round of recommendations. And if you'll go to the next slide. Part of the issue that they had is they had 3 very different payment sources. They got paid from Medicaid, VA, and private pay. They all paid differently, different amounts. You could come different days, stay different hours, got transportation or didn't. So all of those factors were incredibly complex for them to work through. They had pretty significant attendance issues, which is not shocking given the population of people who would come, just given the fact that they would often have illnesses, hospital stays, that sort of thing. In addition to that, they had inadequate space, and because they had inconsistent attendance, they had staffing issues because you have to have a certain number of staff per attendees, and they weren't always sure how that was going to work out. In addition to that, they had a new executive director. They were literally in the middle of a fundraising project. Paula was great help to them in that regard, and we're really struggling with how to figure that out. They struggled greatly trying to figure out how to deal with the factors involved. They had a relatively recent merger. Their boards did not seem to have meshed very well. That they had transportation issues because of their location in the Russell neighborhood, and they really had not developed a really good client recruitment procedure. Okay, and on to the next. What we did, and I give a total shout out to Karen here, I say we, but she developed a useful dynamic spreadsheet that I'm going to show you a picture of in a minute, that literally let them move the number of people that they got from the VA, or the number of people that they got from Medicaid or private pay. And if we had this percentage, how's our profitability work out? If we had that percentage, it was amazing. I mean, truly an amazing document. In the midst of that, we also, and these were the things that are phase 2 sort of deliverables. And the other thing we did is we gave them some really good, and George, a total shout out to you for this, gave them some really good recommendations as to organizations that they could work with, whether it was churches or sororities, fraternities, or veterans organizations, where they could really go and recruit. We gave them lots of other suggestions as to how to create a pipeline and work with that. And so then if you'll go to the next slide, which is the spreadsheet that Karen developed, and Karen, jump in here and explain this because you'll be able to do a better job than I. But what you can see is that all of these factors could be altered, changed. So, and then that would then automatically result in the information on annual revenue and so forth. And then when COVID hit in the middle of this, Karen was able to back off and say, okay, based on that you're probably not going to be able to do what you did before, and you're not going to be able to grow the way you would hope. So let's back that off and do it differently. All of which my guess is they will be using this tool for years to come. So any questions? Anybody else on the team want to jump in? And there's one more slide to show, just because it was extraordinary what Karen was able to do.
Pam,
Yes.
on the previous, this is Kim McCassell, on the previous slide on that spreadsheet, was the goal there to like create what was sort of the like a benchmark annual revenue, and then different scenarios to see if you could optimize that?
Karen,
Yes.
if you want to jump in, but the answer is yes, because because the VA paid differently than Medicaid. The VA people could only come 3 days a week versus Medicaid people versus private pay. As those factors moved in conjunction with each other, they created, various profitabilities. And Karen, please jump in.
Right. And in addition to that, as Pam mentioned, one of the things they really struggled with was client attendance. And we wanted to be able to show them what that impact was, because it's not like daycare that we all think of, that if you're paying for your child to go to daycare, it doesn't matter if you don't take them that week, you're still paying for it. But for this, because it's a reimbursement based system, and even on the private pay situation, if they don't show up, they don't get charged. And yet ElderServe would have had to have staffing there. So we were trying to get them to understand the impact of that attendance was, so that they could put some things in place to help improve attendance, and show them that little increases in attendance, going from 65%, which had been their typical, even to 70%, that had a $25,000 impact just alone, just improving that 5 percentage points without doing anything else, without changing their mix, without increasing the number of clients. So, trying to do those sorts of things, and then also giving them the ability to say, well, what would be optimal? But keeping in mind that what might be optimal from a total revenue standpoint, we also wanted them to be able to continue to serve their mission, because the mission is to serve the Russell community, and that senior community that didn't have the same amount of resources. You didn't want that to be a place that that went away from them. So it's having that balance of private pay, VA, and Medicaid was important, but we wanted them to be able to understand, there were levers they could pull, and they could control some things.
Really strong. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from that team? If not, thank you, Pam, and thank you, team, for that. Really great work. Okay, our next report out is going to be from the Decode project, and that's going to be Chris Herman. So let me get that slide deck pulled up, and thank you, Chris, for jumping in, because I know Beth couldn't be with us today. Give me like a 3 Mississippi, and okay. I'll make it full screen. How's that?
I'm not seeing it, Aaron.
Okay. Let's try this. How about now?
Now, got it.
Okay. Take it away.
Okay. Really interesting project. You're going to see that we worked through this together as a team, and got very involved with the Decode organization. Our team members were Steve, Al, Beth, John, and Nancy. We had a fantastic team leader with Beth, who unfortunately, as Aaron said, couldn't be with us. I think she's involved with a product launch today, and had to stay with her clients. And secondly, John Fleming, who was a great team member, also was very generous and gave us endless use of his office space. Next slide, Aaron. John kept a photo document of what we did. This is his office that he let us use many, many times. And we appreciate that. And you can see the different size groups that we talk with. And let's go to the next slide. The original ask for the project was to talk how they could benefit from us. And they wanted a professional website revamp, a review and edit of their strategic plan, assistance with public relations, marketing, and a development playbook, strategic planning around the board recruitment and development. And they really needed a semi-permanent workspace that they could call home that had the basic office amenities. And that was the ask going into the original project. The start date there was October, the last cycle of the 2019 class. Next slide. In the first cycle, we realized that this was a very young organization and had needs in a broad range of areas. And you know from your past experience with small organizations, that is not unusual. We spent a great deal of time with them reviewing the history, the current state of the program and the project. We attended board meetings to get feedback. We looked at that carefully. We worked on best practices for the board. We brought in Lynn Ashton as a consultant who did a fantastic job helping us. She met with us and talked with us on several occasions, and then sent comments and ideas back later just on one-off questions that came up. But conducting work sessions, we talked about how to strengthen the board. We talked about their programming. We talked about who were their target customers. And we brought in a retired teacher from Jefferson County system who had been involved with early childhood education. And she took their materials, worked through them in detail, and gave us her consultation about what she thought of the materials and the presentations. And at that point, we got to the end of the first cycle. And we realized then that there was really a lot more work that we needed to do. So we signed on for a second cycle. And there we welcomed Nancy to come on board with the team. And we started then asking fundamental questions about what is the product that you're offering. And believe it or not, there was a lot of different perspectives on that. And it's really early childhood reading and reading skills. But when you start talking about products and then you try to clarify who the actual customer is it the student, is it the parents, is it the school, and so on, work through a lot of thoughtful assessments there. We worked on reviewing the messaging, which needed to be simplified. It got too complex and too detailed. And Ken Middleton, rest his soul, came in and was a wonderful help and addition. Such a good man, and we miss him. And he certainly left our project better off for being with us. They did not have a good financial model. They had, I would say at best, a fairly weak spreadsheet type of approach. We worked on that. Beth took the lead, and you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. But we also, through Beth, identified a development partner that helped provide pro bono website development. And I think this was really an opportunity to take advantage of the COVID situation when their workload was down, and Beth was able to get them on board to help work on that task. And then we gave them definite feedback on the development plan. We finished all this in April, and sheltering was in place, and we felt like there was still a lot more to be done. So we decided to move forward yet again, and we took up a new role that we later learned, and I think they did as well, that it was included in their bylaws. That is an advisory committee. And all of the team members, all the could stayed on to continue with this. And we said we didn't want to give them 6 months. John was instrumental in coming up with the idea of let's give them days. And so we said we would sign on for 179 days. And John's idea, and we all quickly agreed to it, was that we needed to make each day count as we went through this third phase of work, because we had a hard stop at the end. And so I will tell you, today we have 129 days left, and we talk about that whenever we meet with them, and be sure that they keep a sense of urgency. But the work done to date now has brought us a long way. We've worked with the board. We've worked with board development. We've led 2 different board of directors meetings with different ones of us acting as chairs, because honestly, they weren't familiar with how a board meeting would be run using Robert's Rules of Order and the different formalities of making a motion and approving it, and those things that we take as pretty basic. We did a complete revamp of the job descriptions, position descriptions for all of the key assigned positions. We've reviewed and updated the bylaws for the organization. Under under Beth's leadership, we have a fiscal 2021 plan that's nearly final, and we should begin to, I think, get that finalized and hopefully get it voted on in the upcoming board meeting. We've initiated messaging to tell the Decode project story, which is something we needed simplified for the website to really help that become a tool for the ask in funding. And then we've recommended, and since the recommendation, voted in a new board member. So we're making a lot of headway. We're helping a very young organization that had a lot to learn, but they have great hearts and great ideas, and they are, I think, going to be successful in the long run, and we're glad to be able to help them. I'll stop at this point and see if Nancy or John, I think John's still on, if you would like to add anything to this, any comments? I know John was going to leave early, and I don't know if he's still here. Nancy?
He's still on here, but I don't know if he has anything.
Yeah,
John's unmuted.
You did a great job. You didn't miss anything. It was great to work on the project. Some great people. I wrote down one word, and that was teachable. They were, if you gave them a good idea, they worked with it. And I can't say it any better that they were teachable. I will say a round of a standing ovation to Beth and her leadership. I want to be with her wherever she is, because Beth is good.
Yeah, she's a super person. We learned a lot from each other, as always, and that's a big part of what we do in Encore. We help others, and I think we learn from our team members. So I guess, Nancy, unless you have something, that concludes our report.
Okay.
Aaron, back to
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. Great project. Another one where you guys did 2 cycles and now you've signed up for 179 more days, but you better not go too far because we need you here still.
Well, we're on a countdown.
Okay, that's right. Okay, the next one we've got is the Montessori School of Louisville. So this is going to be Susan Smith reporting out. So Melissa, if you could look for Susan Smith. I will warn you all, this is the one that was valued by the executive director at $1 million. So I'm excited to hear what you did that's worth, kind of want to do like the Dr. Evil $1 million. Let me get the slides up. Okay. Susan, you want to take it away?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. Well, we're very humbled to be valued at $1 million. But having said that, I think that we did do a substantial amount of very valuable work for this organization. And our team was comprised of Bill Brown, Joe Mitchell, Kim McCaskill, and myself. Lynn Ashton started out with us, but after a couple of sessions, she had to drop out. So we missed you, Lynn, but we carried on and we did accomplish a lot. Next slide. The Montessori School mission statement, when we got started, is what's in front of you. We ignite the child's innate love of learning in a diverse and nurturing community by integrating authentic Montessori philosophy with contemporary research-based educational methods. We empower each individual to make knowledgeable, responsible, and peaceful contributions to the global community. So we looked at that and said, wow, where do we go from here? Their request was to help them position themselves as the preferred educational alternative in Metro Louisville for preschool all the way up to through the 8th grade. And in the last 2 years, they had expanded from preschool and elementary to include those middle school grades of 7th and 8th grade. So we said that mission had a lot to digest, and we thought that we could help in rewriting the mission statement to start with. So next slide. What we ended up with was that the Montessori School of Louisville exists to transform the educational experience so that confident, caring, competent, and critical thinking individuals emerge. Thought that was much more focused and clear to people who might be looking at them as a solution to their information that they were seeking. Next slide. As we began to deal with the well, first of all, let me say that it was something of a challenge initially to engage the executive director, even though she was the one that had submitted the proposal and had indicated that the board was aware of it. After Aaron reached out to the executive director and said, "We have a team for you," the first response to that did not come back from the executive director. It came back from another person's staff as a director of communications, and that seemed to include also community engagement. So our first kind of line in the sand that we drew was we need to have the executive director as our point person, and she was okay with that. So we began to engage her. She's a very talented person with a background in Montessori in a for-profit environment, and as such, she had never worked with a board of directors in a nonprofit setting. She had been very successful in having a profitable school, and I think those skills lent themselves very well to the financial success that the school has experienced and the growth that they have. But we felt like we needed to help them focus on a number of issues and started with, so what are the cultural values that this organization has? And we learned in the process of our meetings with the executive director that they had had 4 executive directors in the 11-year history of the school. The genesis of the school was parent-driven. After a Montessori program at our Mother of Sorrows Catholic Church folded, and the parents wanted to continue having a school, so they founded and had shepherded the growth and development of the Montessori School of Louisville. The board, as the organization was formed, was parents. And as we stepped in, we recognized that much of the culture was defined by that parent ownership model that did not necessarily lend itself well to organizational growth and development, and certainly not a strong, well-defined board of directors and a board process or a relationship with the executive director. So these are, thanks to Kim and a model that she uses in her consulting business, and that evolved from her work at Brown-Forman. We did a cultural assessment by getting feedback from parents, stakeholders, board of directors, teachers, and certainly the executive director and her kind of joined at the hip director of communications, who it turns out also is a parent and has 3 children who attend the school. So there were a lot of boundary issues that emerged, and as you look at the core cultural values, you'll see that they're defined as integrity, caring, diversity and inclusion, grace, excellence, transformation, commitment, community, individuality, and potential possibilities. And the little bubbles below each of those squares indicate how the input indicated that they were achieving and modeling those core cultural values. So you'll see in caring, they had about 50% of what it might take to be effective carers for the organization. Same true of diversity and inclusion, commitment, and then the areas that needed the most work was grace, which we'll define for you a little bit longer, or a little bit further into the presentation, and community engagement. Next slide.
Are you there,
Hello?
Susan? Yep.
Hello?
Yep.
Yes, I
think-
am. Can you hear me?
Okay. We can hear you, but you froze up for a second there.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You're back.
I have AT&T fiber, but sometimes it's unstable with Zoom. So then we did an environmental landscape analysis, which they had not really even understood what the components of that are. So you'll see that we looked at, what's going on in each of these 4 areas, and particularly under the Montessori School of Louisville observations. Much of our observations grew not only from our extensive meetings with the executive director, but also our observations by attending a board meeting early on in our process, in which we learned that there was something rotten in Denmark. So we shifted our focus with the executive director to kind of figure out what is this issue or set of issues that is emerging around a lack of connectedness that we perceived with the executive director and some of the teachers, and also the executive director and some members of the board. We learned by going to the board meeting that beyond the core of parents that made up a very small board of 7 people, that there were 2 people that they had recruited to start in January. And it was very clear that there was no real formalized recruiting process, no type of orientation process for new board members, no real type of defined committee work. It was a hot mess in terms of our assessment of the organizational structure, and particularly the governance structure. Move to the next slide. Can you hear me? The next slide. Hello? Thank you.
I did move to sometimes it takes like a 5 Mississippi, Susan. So as soon as you say next slide, I hit it, but sometimes it takes a couple seconds to get through.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't unstable again. So we decided that we would guide them through a SWOT analysis, which would then hopefully launch some key strategic questions that they would need to answer in order to move forward. And while I have this slide up in front of you, I'm not going to go through all of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats that we identified. But we got to this analysis by, first of all, not only attending the board meeting, but following that, having a listening session with the teachers and staff. And Kim and Joe facilitated that process after school one day. And it was very, very clear that there was not an insignificant divide between the executive director and some of the teachers. There were also a lot of boundary issues that were clear about the role that the teachers played in direct relationship to the board and to the parents who didn't seem to necessarily perceive the executive director's role as pertinent to their children as much as the teacher's role. So there were a lot of issues. We then, on March the 7th, facilitated a 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Strategic planning session around the SWOT analysis that would emerge from that. We had told them that we wanted to have a lot of diversity in who attended that, so that the board members were represented, that parents who were not board members, teachers and staff members. And so they wanted to open it up to everybody who was perceived as a stakeholder and see who wanted to come. And that was the executive director and the director of communications idea, because they didn't want anybody to feel like they had been overlooked or intentionally disregarded. And when I think about what's going on in our community right now with the distrust of the police force and the mayor, and that sort of thing, to a lesser extent, but to a significant extent, that kind of lack of trust among the various constituencies of this school was very, very apparent. So next slide. Out of the SWOT analysis came 5 strategies that we left them with. And the first, and hopefully not surprising after you listened to my earlier remarks, was to improve board leadership style, realign board composition, and better define the roles and responsibilities to better position the Montessori school for long-term success. The second was to eliminate the cultural issues or tensions that exist between board, director, teacher, and parent constituencies to propel them toward a more ideal culture. The third was to jumpstart fundraising and endowment programming to have the capital needed for campus changes and improvements, so the school is safer and more competitive with the facility offerings of other private schools. The fourth was to maximize understanding, then clearly communicate what it means to follow the Montessori philosophy, so that the school becomes the desired school and the community myths surrounding Montessori are eliminated. And the last was to create a strategic vision and plan that inspires understanding, commitment, and participation of the entire community, so that the school is all rowing together toward their future. They perceived, so we presented this to the executive director, and who had at that point recognized that it's probably best to meet with us without what I called her sidekick, because there were some pretty overt passive aggressive things going on between the two of them. And I think the executive director began to understand that perhaps all was not well in that relationship. And then we also presented to the board of directors, and very appropriately, the president of the board decided that she was not the person to lead this organization in partnership with the executive director into the next opportunity for growth and development in charting the future of the school in the next 5 years or the next 20 years. That seems to have made a huge difference in our follow-up conversations with the executive director in launching a very appropriate development of those 5 strategic questions. So I'm going to stop and ask Bill and Joe and Kim if there are other things you think we should add.
Susan, this is Bill. That was a very comprehensive report. The team did an extraordinary job. The initial ask was basically to assistance in marketing and re-imaging and repositioning the organization in order to grow enrollment. But as Susan pointed out, this was a very, very complex situation, and I think we laid it out very effectively for the board and leadership. And I think as a result, the Montessori School of Louisville will have a very bright future.
Okay, awesome work. Thank you, team. Appreciate your report out. Thank you, Susan. Well, we'll all decide the valuation there. $1 million seems fair to me. Okay, next up, Mike Smith is going to share the report out for the senior care experts team. But Mike, you don't have slides to show, I believe. You're just going to chat with us.
I'll just chat a little bit. Thank you, Aaron. Senior Care Experts is a 45-year-old home care agency based in St. Matthews, not-for-profit. Even though it's been around for 45 years, nobody knows about them. Part of that reason behind that is there's a lot of noise in that space in our region. There are over 90 home care agencies. They're only one of 3 not-for-profits, but I'm not sure that distinction is probably lost on the consumer. But therefore, the original ask in the project was around the visibility, image, and branding of them, since nobody knew about them. And it switched, as the last project just noted, it switched pretty dramatically as we got involved in it. Our team was a wonderful team, and we really enjoyed working together on this project. Our skills complemented each other very well. The team consisted of Nadine Brewer, Cindy Emick, Alan Engel, Barbara Michael, Susan Zabeda, and I was the facilitator. And we worked with a highly energetic, highly committed executive director from home care, our senior care experts who'd been there almost 8 years, Patty DeSell. By the way, Aaron, she dubbed our marketplace experience at Leadership Louisville as speed dating for not-for-profits, which I thought was spot on. It was a very apt description.
Yes, it is.
Senior Care Experts is unique in the sense that it's a pass-through organization. They don't actually offer products of their own. They have 3 main products: Meals for Seniors, they sell a medical alert system, and they do non-medical home care. They don't provide any of those services themselves. They provide very heavy duty. Their secret sauce is case management, social work. They assess the needs of seniors to stay independently, happily, and safely in their home. And their big deal is saying, we sell people what they need, not what we sell, because we spend a lot of the time assessing their needs and then going out and finding it for them. Once we got involved in the project, we found out very quickly that while Patty herself was very engaged and very committed, her board was very much less so. She said it was a very immature, young, and inexperienced board, but we assessed they were also very uninvolved. You might be able to explain those first 2 or 3, but there's really no excuse for being uninvolved. And our work pretty much ended up in 2 significant areas. Financial viability of the organization was the first one. Their annual budget is about $1.2, $1.3 million a year, but the last 2 fiscal years, they've lost over $150,000 a year. And a couple years ago, they had reserves built up of about $300,000, but those reserves are less than $200,000. And we assessed pretty quickly that unless something changed dramatically, they'd be out of business in a couple of years. Their three main products, meals, medical alerts, and the interesting thing about that is in the non-medical home care, when you combine direct and indirect expenses, they were not charging enough for their services to cover direct costs. And their secret sauce, the case management, they were not charging at all. Before the last 2 or 3 years, they had covered their expenses mostly by doing some aggressive fundraising, which they stopped a couple of years ago when they had reserves of $300,000. So I think we helped Patty and the board see that their financial model was not viable. So we encouraged them to fix that by increasing their charges and figuring out a fair but workable charge for their secret sauce, their case management, and they've implemented all of those. Susan and Alan in particular did a great job of governance and board issues. We convinced Patty she didn't have to do it all. And her main message through us to the board was, it's the new day, I need your involvement, I feel abandoned on all issues, but particularly the fundraising and the finances and the operations. So get involved or get out. That was not her, she didn't say it nicer than that, that was her message. And of her 9 board members, 4 of them then promptly resigned. But one of the board members was the director of risk management for Norton Healthcare. And at that time, a thing called COVID was just starting, so you might imagine what happened to her schedule. But to Patty's credit, she's recruited 3 new board members in the last 6 weeks. They've been approved. They joined the board at a meeting this week, and she has a lot of hope that they'll be better, more active board members than the previous group. The other issue in terms of operations was just by elbow grease of Patty over the last 3 or 4 months, she's raised about $110,000 through grants and private donations. Half of that was PPP money from the government for payroll dollars, but the other was half was dollars she raised on her own. And it's possible that this year they'll come close to breaking even as opposed to losing $150,000 a year. And the other thing we advise them is if they can't find a viable financial model, perhaps they should seek a merger or an acquisition partner while they still have a bit of a dowry of $200,000 to bring to the table and to offer. The board is considering that, but I think at the present time, they're going to take our suggestions to raise prices and begin charging for services they need to charge for. And the new board will hopefully help Patty create a path forward. But as I mentioned, it was a wonderful project, a fun project. Our team worked very well together. We didn't get, we weren't the $1 million of value, as Aaron just said, but we valued our services at about $25,000 to $30,000, and I think I saw in Patty's evaluation she agreed, so at least we didn't overvalue ourselves. Anybody have anything to add?
This is Susan, Mike, Susan Zapata. We also did some work with them on trying to find other sources of volunteers because their volunteer source, the volunteering was crucial to a lot of their service delivery, and several of their volunteers were quite on in years, and that became even more of a difficulty when COVID-19 hit, and they were the very people who shouldn't be out exposing themselves to other folks. So we offered that. We offered some upgrades to the website and an awareness that one of their key staff members who delivers these social services they weren't charging for is also fairly senior in years. And as Mike pointed out, now's the right time for them to go looking for a partner or a merger because down the road it might not look so healthy or so good.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Susan, because one of the things in terms of recruiting and retaining volunteers, they have a good base of about 90 volunteers, but we did a brainstorming center at the Jewish Community Center where Alan is former executive director and had great contacts to get meeting space. But we did a brainstorming session that Nadine led where we all contributed, spent about an hour just brainstorming ideas to recruit and retain volunteers. As often happens in Encore, that was pretty much a magic moment. And I left that meeting saying, wow, all the expertise, all the great ideas Patty received from us. I might not have thought it was worth $1 million, but maybe it was. But that's the value of our many diverse experiences that we bring to the table, and we saw it very clearly that day.
Mike, thank you and Susan and the whole team for the work on this project. I appreciate your report out. We still got a couple to go, although one of them I know is going to be really short. But Harold Butler is going to do a report out for USA Cares. So I want to spotlight Harold while I make the slides visible to the group. Okay, is Harold on here? There he is. You're still muted, Harold.
There we go. Thank you. USA Cares is, this was a continuation project from an Ignite project. I happen to be the mentor of the Ignite team that was on USA Cares, and we recognized then that there were larger issues that still needed to be addressed, and so a Encore team was then put together to follow on from Ignite. USA Cares is a national not-for-profit that provides emergency assistance to post 9/11 active military veterans and their families. Shorthand is that they're a help center for people who find themselves in financial difficulty or have other issues that need addressing with some counseling. Our team is comprised of the Butler boys, Doug and Harold, Sandra Dodge, Rick King, and our beloved Ken Middleton, who was a facilitator. Just as a sidelight, we finished on time. COVID had just started, but we were ready to make this report in April, which if you worked with Ken, you know that why that happened. And it had been so long ago, really, that I had not focused on the fact that we needed to do a report out here now in June. So I pulled this together quickly yesterday, and all I had to do was go find the memo that Ken had written at the end of the engagement to summarize everything and just turn it into the slides you're about to see. There are two typos in the slide that Ken had nothing to do with. Paula Hale becomes Paul Hale at one point, and Susan Zapata becomes Susan Zapata. I caught those with clearer eyes this morning. But so we got, like some other groups we've heard today, we did get some special assistance from other Encore members who were not on the team. So we were brought together to help develop goals and plans to significantly expand fundraising and infrastructure to meet requests. And frankly, what had happened at USA Cares is that they had grown beyond what was their current capacity. They had just gone through a change in director, et cetera. So they were floundering around trying to figure out what's next. So with all our work, next slide, what we were able to do for them is at first just create some stability. There's a time of significant change with both a new CEO and a new director of development. So we were literally a sounding board for the CEO as he developed his agenda after coming in. We were able to give some validation, or perhaps create some awakening, probably would be more accurate, to the need for the organization to grow outside of Kentucky to meet its national role. It could just simply not fundraise enough in this market to fund all of the requests that they were getting from places like Texas, California, Florida, and so they needed to expand or broaden their sources of funding. They have a chapter organization that was supposed to help with that, but that chapter organization was in ill repair. So we did a lot to help strengthen the chapter operations and repurpose them. We also, thanks to Rick King, introduced a concept of having some satellite offices on the operations side to really act as support, guidance, and leadership for the chapter organizations. The next slide. We also identified missing skill sets within their current staffing, provided suggestions for training, and suggested some other routes for enhancement of their staff. So how did we do all that? Drilling down, we talked about the outside perspective and the soundboarding, but we also had team experience in 5 areas that we were able to share with them: development, marketing, growth strategies, leadership, and organizational structure, including the structure of their board and the members on the board. Next slide. We connected USA with Susan Zepeda for grant writing counseling. We connected the USA with Paula Hale, not Paul Hale, for development counseling. We went through lengthy planning discussions on how to salvage and rein in this out-of-control chapters organization. We had several phone calls and 2 face-to-face meetings just on this topic with the CEO. Next question. One of our team members, Sandra Dodge, really donated through her organization, the Oliver Group, administration of a predictive index assessment and analysis, which really helped them a lot in understanding who they are and how to deal with each other. We did extensive drafting of revised chapters handbook and bylaws. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, they had to cancel a major fundraiser, which we had done quite a bit of consulting with them on. They suffered a very quick drop in donations, which created need for layoff of some staff. So next slide, what all that meant, oh, sorry, not the next slide. What all that meant was that we were thanked for our work. Our work was greatly appreciated, but that the CEO at that point just did not have the bandwidth to look more than a month, probably more than a week down the road as to what's next, because they are sort of a hand-to-mouth organization, and he was worrying about how to keep the door open and keep things going. But a great engagement, a great follow-on to the Ignite work. We included the Ignite team in part of our work and met with them as well, and so a lot of collaboration went on there as well. So other members of the team are on the call today. Anyone want to add or fill in anything?
Okay. Great work, and thank you so much, Harold. I know I know Paula is still helping them, and Ken Middleton was as well, even after you all wrapped up. And I even had a conversation with Trace, kind of talking about how they're pivoting fundraisers, and we were kind of discussing what other nonprofits are doing right now virtually. So thanks for all you're doing for USA Cares. One last report out. I know we're a little over time here, but this one is brief, and Steve Rungworth is going to share a little bit about their engagement with Hatching House.
Thank you, Aaron. So I shared some with you back in April. Those of you who weren't on the meeting, this will be new to you. For some of the rest of you, it may be a bit of a repeat. We had a great team: Steve Ellis, Larry Hartog, Michael Shake, and Ginger Wallace. As the other team said, diverse backgrounds. We all were able to contribute. But this project was different from probably the other 6 or 7 that I've been involved in, and that some of the others have as well. We came into it looking at the paperwork, seeing an organization that had a $1.2 million annual budget, with a staff of 12. The first meeting, we realized the annual budget last year was $15,000 and one unpaid staff person with some helpers. This project was a lot different than what we expected going in. We kind of regrouped, and it became largely a counseling session for the person who was trying to get this nonprofit up and running. And I think we were able to help her with focus, with trying to define her mission better and focus on developing some partnerships. At the end of it, she was very appreciative, but it really felt like more personal consultation and maybe career management than it did working with a traditional nonprofit. I think it was time well spent for us. I think that we definitely could help her, but probably underutilize the talent of the 5 individuals for the amount of hours that we put in. Some learnings, and we've reviewed this with Aaron prior to this meeting. There's probably some refinement of the questionnaire that we can do to make it clear. Keisha, who runs the organization, thought that what it meant by budget was what she aspired the budget to be, not what the actual is. There could be some honest confusion there. And then secondly, to use our marketplace to help vet. So I'd encourage all of us to ask pointed questions. And if you see any concerns, we didn't pick up on this. The 5 of us did not pick up on this in the marketplace discussion, but perhaps some of our colleagues did. If you do pick up on anything like that, we should probably share that amongst us going forward, because we'll probably run into some situations that are not perfect going forward, and we can help each other through that. That's it. Not $1 million presentation, but gets the prize for the shortest.
There you go. Thank you, Steve. And actually, I did send revised questions for our proposal form. So it's what is your current budget? What is your current, right this moment, staff size? Not what do you hope to be in a few years? There was a couple of other spots after our